Well, hello to you. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Jenny Kirk, and today we're back on the Project OO9 build. So we're back in the library, and you'll remember from the previous videos we've built up the terrain, the track, the electrics, the grass, the trees, and the rocks, and now it's time to do the water features. Now I know a lot of people really like the idea of adding water features to their layout, and I'm going to show you how to do that primarily with the deluxe materials casting resin, which is designed specifically for doing clear water, and it's a great product. We've used it upstairs on Weir Yard to do the water features up there. We did some videos on that, but today I'm going to show you everything from the ground up for doing the water feature, and we're going to be doing it on Potato Mountain, as we've started to call it. So come with me in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that can be purchased in the UK through their UK stockist Tram Fabrique. Details in the description box below. Okay, so let's get building. This is the product that I've chosen for today's video's water feature build, and it's the solid water from Deluxe Materials, and we're going to put a link down below to help you track down some of this if you really like what you see. Now on Project OO9 there's a few areas where I planned water features right from the start. I think water always works really well on any model railway. It adds something of great interest, and I think everybody likes that murky bit of either a pond, a stream, a ditch, something like that. But we're going to be getting a little bit more ambitious here. I'm going to be trying to do a waterfall area. Now it's not going to be like the Niagara Falls, but I want to be able to build something that's a suggestion of water flowing down the mountain and then underneath the bridge that I've built in at one side of this layout. We've put in the ready rocks that were cast and painted up in the previous video, and all the glue has now set. Now what I want to show you here is that we've built a kind of cofferdam as well, and this is really important. The solid water is actually quite watery when you first pour it, and it remains that way for quite a length of time, so you're not against the clock really on doing this. But it does mean that it will find any way out that it can, so we don't want it just flowing off the edge of the board. I also want to do a couple of ponds and a ditch as well. Now the ditch is quite easy. I'm going to cast the bottom with solid water, and then later on I'm going to use some gloss varnish to suggest kind of water oozing out the hillside and just running down the cliff face, and I think that that is going to work quite well. Around the other side I've prepared some ponds as well, and these I've already glued some junk to the bottom. I thought that as being a slate mining area where the slate mine has fallen out of use, there's going to be some industrial detritus just strewn around. So I've raided the bits box for some bits and pieces of plastic, and I've glued them into the bed of the pond using just the PVA. These come ready painted. They came off a variety of different sources, most notably an Airfix World War I tank, and also some of the leftover pieces from the Wills Victorian cast iron bridge that I've used around the other side of the layout. These will add some visual interest through the water. Once we've got the solid water in place, I'm going to show you a way to model floating weeds that you do get an awful lot in ponds and watercourses, and we're going to be using some of the Woodland Scenics clump foliage for this, and it's a really simple and easy technique, but it does really work. The solid water comes as a two-part resin. In the bottles they'll keep pretty much forever, but once you mix these together, what actually happens is a chemical reaction, and over time they will then solidify come what may. You have to make sure that you've got no damp, so one of the things that we've been doing in here is we've been drying out the bed of the river and the pond area, lighting the wood burning stove as well, and we gave it a week just to make sure that any of that moisture moisture from the diluted PVA from when we were doing the ballasting and also the grass layer has just all evaporated. The way that these are sold, if you mix all of one bottle with all of the other, they are the right consistency to set properly. If you're going to be using less than a full bottle, then it is important to measure out, because if you get it wrong, your resin may not actually ever set, and that can be a real nuisance, because once you've poured it and got it in place, you're pretty much stuck with it. So if you're using less than a full bottle, it does pay to have something like a little measuring cup, and also there's a syringe as well if you want a very, very small quantity. Don't skimp on the mixing, and we'll come to that later on in the video. You need to spend probably a good 20 minutes stirring and stirring and stirring. Because both liquids are completely clear, it may not be immediately apparent if they're not fully mixed properly. But believe me, even after you've left it a day to set, it will very quickly become apparent if there are sections which are not properly mixed, and you'll end up with a horrible syrupy goo that will just get on everything. So I've got the solid water here, Deluxe Materials, and I've got a bowl that's big enough to take both of these, because I'm going to use all of it, and it's not a problem for me. If you had to, you can always measure out the actual amounts that you need, making sure to get the quantities correct. But I'm just going to tip all of that out. As you can see, it reminds me a little bit of glucose syrup. It's got that kind of texture to it. This is the hardener. I'm just going to tip that in as well. And you can see they're both exactly the same colour. Now this does have a chemical reaction. It's how it sets. You can think of it as I think it's a thermosetting plastic, but you actually have a lot of time. It's measured in hours, not minutes. So it's not like when we did the plaster bandage and you know, we were very much against the clock. With this, we have more than enough time to do everything that we need. Now we're going to get a glue spreader, and we're just going to mix it and mix it, and there's no immediate indication in here on whether it's fully mixed because both liquids are completely clear. So what I suggest is thoroughly mix for at least a good 20 minutes, and that ensures that the hardener and the resin are fully mixed together, and this is to avoid any of those issues that I talked about where you end up with some of the resin that is not mixed with the hardener and it just stays as that sticky syrup forever and a day. So I'm going to keep working this, and you come back in 20 minutes. Actually, no, for you, it'll be right. I think I'm pretty happy that that's all thoroughly mixed together. I'm not seeing any streakiness, any kind of weird clouding effects which tell you that you've got two liquids fighting each other. So I'm going to just use a plastic cup to keep the glue spreader in. And the reason for that is because the glue spreader is just short enough that if I leave it on the side of this bowl, it will slide in and I'll end up getting stuff everywhere trying to get it back out. So I've got a syringe here. It's the same type of syringe that I use for when I'm doing the ballasting to get that glue mix on. But what I'm going to be using this for is to draw some of this resin out and then apply it accurately to the various parts of the layout. I'm going to start here with this kind of ditch area. So put it in and you can see it just draws this resin mix up really easily. So I'm just going to try and knock some of the drips off the end so we don't drip them everywhere, and then it's quite simply a case of just syringing this in, and it's going to take several full syringes to build up. And because this is quite liquid, it's self-leveling. It finds its own level where it's happy, so we can just quite happily build up the layer of resin. I'm going to have one more syringe full in there. And because we're not on the clock, there's no real hurry on this. Now that we've got that resin in, I want to show you the technique that I've got for giving it an illusion that there's some horrible weeds and stuff growing in there. So I've got some of that Woodland Scenics clump foliage. We used this elsewhere on the layout. And what I'm going to actually do is chuck some of this in. And you may think, what are you doing? That's just floating on top. But believe me, what actually happens is the resin fully soaks into this material and it sinks. And then what you actually end up with is this is suspended in the resin looking like thick, clumpy weeds. So I'm going to put that in, and then I'm going to put another pass of resin on top of that. And then we can just leave that to set and it'll be absolutely fine. Now this clump foliage does take probably about an hour. It will slowly settle down and into the resin. So we'll just leave it be. And that'll be that ditch area. We'll use some gloss varnish eventually just to create a suggestion of moistness on that rock face. And that'll be absolutely perfect. So I'm going to go ahead now. I'm going to fill in the ponds around the other side. And then I'm going to move on to filling up the splash pool at the bottom of the waterfall, the stream and river area right up to that cofferdam, and then any of the leftover resin. I'm going to start to use that in the same way that you might use gloss varnish, just to run some rivulets down the waterfall. Now these will tend to just keep going and run down into the pool at the bottom, but they'll leave behind a glossy resin finish that will give that suggestion of water falling down. Once all of this is set, I can then dry brush very lightly, something like a gloss white or a silvery gunmetal-y colour, very gently over that to give the illusion of agitated splashing water, and we'll build up that more foamy effect that you look for in a waterfall. But this is a long, laborious process. I'm just going to keep syringing this in, and then you come back and take a look when it's done. We're given the resin chance to set, and actually it set really nicely, and as you can see here, it is completely solid. The thing I love about the Deluxe Materials product is actually its low odour, and that's quite important if you're doing this indoors. I've removed the cofferdam, so we've got this nice neat edge to the edge of the baseboard. It's all set lovely. Some of the little other water features we've done are completely solid, and you can see that that clump foliage that I added on the top has sunk in as the resin was setting and now looks like clusters of pondweed, and that is exactly what we wanted. So we're going to turn our attention now to the waterfall, and what I've actually done in the intervening period once the resin had set is I've actually run some varnish type substance down where I want the main bulk of the river to be. I've seen online different ways of doing waterfalls, and there are some great results that you can do out there, but I just felt that all of them were a little bit more complex than I was looking to do and to show you in this video. And you can do things with bathroom sealant and the like, and it just seemed like a tedious, long-winded process. And yes, you'll get great results, but I wanted to go for something a bit easier. So what I've done is I've used that as the basis there. I didn't actually have any gloss varnish, but if you do have gloss varnish, it works just as well. And I actually used some leftover clear coat, which I've had from when I did the Volvo vlog and did some refurbishment work on my old Volvo. Now this is the good stuff. It's not water based, so it's very much like a tin of gloss varnish, and I've just been using this, running the little enclosed brush down and just working a layer in down where the main rivulets of the waterfall would be, painted them on and painted them on all the way down to the bottom and let that set. Now the clear coat itself does set very quickly, I found, so I just built up a couple of layers. It's really easy to do, and the end result is we've got what looks like water, but we haven't got that white water effect, and that's where we're going to add in an extra process. Now I've gone through my paint collection and I've picked out a few colours which I'm going to be using just to get a suggestion of splashing water. Now if you look at photos and videos online of real waterfalls, and when we went to the Lake District and climbed Stickle Gill a number of years ago, we got some great pictures of some of the waterfalls there. Water itself is pretty much clear, but as it splashes, the way it reflects the light makes it look much whiter and angrier, and I thought that a metallic number 56, which is gunmetal, would be a great starting point. Put a little bit of a twinkle in some of those rivulets. I've also been through the rest of my Humbrol paint collection and I was looking for gloss white. The problem I've got is I don't have a lot of gloss colours because in model form satin finish and matte finish tends to look better. But I found this. It's Humbrol number 41, which is actually a bit of a cream colour. I'm hoping that this tin still has some liquid in it. If not, we're going to try some of the other colours I've got. They're not necessarily as good, but we're going to give them a whirl. So I'm going to put a little bit of white spirit there. I don't need a huge amount, let's not be too wasteful. And we're going to use that as the solvent to thin out some of these paints. Now I'm going to start with Humbrol number 41. I'm not actually sure whether this is going to be liquid in here, so let's open it up and see what we have got. Surprisingly enough, that is going to be perfect. I've got a bit of a tissue here, and you don't want a lot. We're not painting, we're effectively going to be dry brushing, and we're going to use as well a little bit of the white spirit just to thin that down. Thin that down quite a lot. If you're worried there's too much liquid on the brush, just dab a bit of that off, and then right where we're going to have some of the rapids, we're going to just use this to get a suggestion of white in. If it's a little bit too liquid, go back to the original paint. Don't overload the brush and just draw that in there, getting a suggestion of white water. You're not looking for a solid coverage. You're looking for almost like a streaky effect. Places where the water is likely to be more agitated, maybe consider using the paint a little neater. Places where it might not be quite so agitated, thin the paint down a little bit. I'm just going to move down here again. You can imagine the water is flowing much more readily, so I'm going to take a little bit more of the neat paint here, splashed over the rocks a little bit. This bit here would be calm because that's kind of like a flat pool. And around here, again, just over the rocks, we might get a little bit of agitation. And if you need to, do consult those pictures. You can find pictures online, or indeed, when you go places, look out for stuff like this, get some pictures. And you can imagine this as being almost like, imagine what Bob Ross would be saying to you. And just getting a little bit over some of these little areas. You can imagine some water spilling over, and it's just, you see, it just starts to bring it out. So we don't want too much. I'm just going to clean off the brush here in the white spirit, and then anywhere where you think maybe there's just a little bit too much white, I'm going to get the tissue, and if you think there's a little bit too much white, dab. Don't brush, just dab. We just want the excess coming up and off. So we're moving on to the next colour, and this is a metallic number 56. This is actually, I think it's gunmetal from the Humbrol enamel range. And as you can see, this is an older tin, so hopefully this is to the older recipe where we really do have flakes of metal in here. And this will hopefully give us that kind of shine that you get from a waterfall as you've got the water droplets knocked up into the air. And we then get away from that mono colour that we've talked about so much. You never want to have one colour. I'm going to mix this up. The metallic paints do have a habit of kind of separating out a bit as the metal tends to go to the bottom. It's just very tiny microscopic metal flakes which give it that kind of sheeny finish. And then when you're happy, do clean off some of that excess, because you don't want to flood the model. Just going to thin that a little bit, and then places where we've got agitation, we're just going to get a little bit in, and I'm going to try a little bit less of the white spirit, a little bit more of the paint, but just dab the edge of the brush in. That's all we want. We're dabbing the edge of the brush in and just, we almost get that effect you get on a photograph where the exposure is ever so slightly longer and the water takes on this strange sort of milky look to it. I'm going to just almost clean the brush on that up there. I don't want really an awful lot of that brush cleaning fluid, the white spirit on there. I'm now effectively using the brush to polish some of these areas down, and you can keep going back and just cleaning any excess off the brush bristles. It's almost like we're cleaning certain areas. You're cleaning back to that resin layer that we put down. In my case with the clear coat, you can use the gloss varnish as well. If at any point you're not quite happy with the colours, you can go through the process a second time. See, I'm looking at that, I'm thinking maybe that's gone a little bit too gunmetal. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to dry brush in a little bit more of that creamy colour. So you can see there we've got those two different colours dry brushed in over the varnish, and what we're going to do now, leave this to dry, and now I'm going to be going over again with, well, I'm using the clear coat, but actually gloss varnish is probably a much easier thing to use, but gives you the same effect. So giving it a quick shake. Now at this point it's going to look a bit milky and weird, but that's because we haven't finished the effect. It's one of those things where everything comes together with the last few strokes of the brush. Once we get the clear coat on, or the gloss varnish, we let that dry, and then dry brushing with the white, really just grazing the bits where we want that angry white, and that's when the colour scheme is going to come together and give us that roaring water. So we've given this a good shake, and then we're just going to paint this in on top of everything that we've done before. What you can see here now is that that kind of milky look has toned down. We've got the gloss back, which is what we want, but within that gloss we have got the suggestion of white flecks, and of course that gunmetal silver as well, giving us a bit of a shine in places. So I'm going to let this dry, and then the final stage will be, we'll go back to that gloss off-white and then just really dry brush it on. We don't want to thin it in any way, we don't want to swish it around like a wash, we just want the flecks of white where we're going to have that suggestion of the really white water. We've given that clear coat gloss varnish a little bit of time to dry, so we're now at a point where I just want to do some dry brushing, and we've gone back to, in my case, Humbrol number 41. You can pick a different colour, you're really just looking for a gloss white. Don't use matte, satin perhaps at a pinch, but really gloss is ideal. And this is going to be proper dry brushing. We're not going to use any of the white spirit. What I want to do is take some of the slightly thicker paint just from the top. I've got a little hair there, move that out. And then using an old tissue, something like that, I'm going to rub most of that off. And then the idea is I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. And anywhere where you see, like here, we've got a steep drop, that's going to be angrier water than some of these other areas where a small amount of water is going to flow almost like a bit of a sheet. So we're just going to get that dry brushing in, and a little bit of paint goes a long way. So again, we've got another area here. Just want to get a bit of dry brushing. I'm going to have to, just on the tip, you don't need to dip the brush in the pot, and we're actually going to just take most of that off. And then we're going to get some flecks of white anywhere where you can imagine the water's going to be agitated. Try and follow the natural flow that the water is going to take. I'll just get it down there, a little bit on there, and at this sort of pool at the bottom, get that white flecks around there, and then in kind of the plunge pool at the bottom, you can do this effect where you kind of just push the bristles into it, stretching out over the resin a little bit. Don't be frightened to go back a little bit where you've been before and just build up just in the little areas, a little bit down there, just over the rocks. And just as I said to you it would, it really came together there at the last minute, so you too have the skills and the confidence to be able to replicate these amazing waterfall and pond effects that we've gone through in this video. So like, share and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next episode where we're going to be looking to do the final detailed touches on this layout. And that's going to include adding a few little cameos using figures and animals and just really bring the scene alive. We're also going to talk a little bit about suitable rolling stock and locomotives to match with the scene, and you'll see that actually a slightly more generic scene such as this can become very versatile for playing not just with OO9 from the Festiniog, the Talyll Llyn, the Linton and Barnstable, but also stepping overseas a little bit, and we'll be looking at some HOE items of locomotive and rolling stock to simulate railways in places like Austria and parts of Germany too. So stay tuned for all of that. This is me, Jenny Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. I'll see you next time. Happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Michael Churchwood, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Tepic, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Andy Finch, Chris Moss, Robert Sears, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grant Line Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, and Mo Henry. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.